The night was quiet, the streets nearly empty, only the hum of broken lights hanging above the cracked road. A human janitor named Daniel walked home slowly, carrying his old bag, his boots scraping against the dusty ground. He had stayed late, again cleaning the empty halls of the academy where others never noticed him. To him, it was just another night, another long walk to his small rented room. But that night was different. From the shadows of a broken alley, a voice whispered, trembling like wind through broken glass, "Please, human, pretend to be my daddy just for one day." Daniel froze, the bag slipping from his tired hand. He looked around, his heart beating faster. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm but uneasy. A small figure moved, stepping out from behind, cracked crates. It was a girl, but not human, her skin faintly glowing with pale silver lines, her large eyes filled with tears. Her clothes were torn, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her body together. She looked fragile, yet the desperation in her eyes made her seem stronger than her broken frame. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen alien workers before, adults forced into heavy labor, but never a child left alone like this. "What did you say?" Daniel whispered, as if afraid to believe her words. The girl lowered her head, her voice shaking. "Please, I just need someone to say I belong, just for tonight, just for one day." Daniel swallowed hard, the air around him heavy with silence. He could have walked away, pretended he never heard, but something inside him refused to let him move. He bent down slowly, trying not to frighten her. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. Her lips trembled, and her answer broke him. "Taken away. I don't know if they are alive. No one wants me, no one claims me, and if patrols find me without family, they will take me away too." Her voice cracked on the last words, as if the fear was choking her. Daniel clenched his fists, feeling the weight of her helplessness. The street was empty, yet it felt like unseen eyes were watching. He knew the law. Abandoned alien children were considered nothing, taken by patrols and never seen again. To help her meant danger, suspicion, and maybe even punishment. Still, he could not ignore the way she looked at him. Her eyes begged for something more than survival. They begged for warmth, for family, even if it was only pretend. He sighed, his voice low but steady. "You want me to pretend to be your father just for one day?" She nodded quickly, clutching the edge of her torn sleeve. Her voice rose in a trembling whisper. "If I have a daddy, even a pretend one, they cannot take me away tonight." Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This child was not asking for food, not asking for money. She was asking for something far heavier, something human. He rubbed his tired face, then crouched closer. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl blinked as if no one had cared to ask her before. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice soft like broken glass. "Lyra," Daniel repeated, his tone gentler. "I can walk with you for tonight, but it is dangerous for both of us." Her small hands reached toward him, trembling yet holding on with desperate strength. "Please, just one night. Just one day." Daniel felt something stir in him, something he thought long dead. Years of loneliness, years of being unseen. And now here was a child, abandoned and desperate, asking him to be more than just a man with a mop and broom. He slowly held out his hand, and she grasped it instantly, holding it as if it was her last chance. Her small fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. Daniel looked around the dark street, the broken lamps flickering like fading stars. He knew this was not the safe choice, but safety had never felt so empty before. Together they began walking, her steps small and quick, his slow and heavy. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the sound of her breathing. She glanced at him, eyes wide with both fear and hope. "Do I look like your daughter now?" she asked suddenly, her voice fragile. Daniel's chest tightened again. He nodded once, firm and steady. "Yes, you look like my daughter," he said, and the words carried more weight than he expected. Lyra smiled faintly, though her eyes were still wet with tears. She pressed closer to his side, her body trembling less than before. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something warm in his empty heart. The night was still dark, danger still waiting at every corner. But in that single moment, under the broken lights of a forgotten street, a man with no family and a girl with no home became something neither of them had expected. They became father and daughter, if only for one day. The night stretched on as Daniel guided Lyra through the quiet streets. Her small hand never let go of his, as if her life depended on his grip. When they finally reached his small rented room, he hesitated before unlocking the door. He had always lived alone in silence, but tonight silence felt like a crime. He opened the door, letting her step inside first. The room was small, barely enough for one man. A bed pushed against the wall, a table with only one chair, a shelf with a few old books. The girl's wide eyes wandered across the space. Her gaze lingered on the blanket folded neatly, the mug on the table, and the cracked mirror in the corner. To her, this simple room must have looked like a palace. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "It feels safe here." Daniel closed the door, sliding the lock into place. Safe was not the word he would use. He knew patrols could come knocking at any hour, and hiding an alien child could ruin him. But when he saw Lyra's small body sink into the chair, her shoulders relaxing for the first time, he decided that, for tonight, it was enough. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked, opening his small food box. Lyra's head lifted quickly, her glowing eyes wide with hope. "Yes," she said, then lowered her gaze, ashamed of how desperate it sounded. Daniel pulled out the last of his bread, a half-loaf hard from age, and placed it on the table. Lyra stared at it, hesitating. "You eat first," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, sliding it closer. "You're the child. You need it more." She tore a small piece, chewing slowly, as if afraid the food would vanish if she ate too fast. Her hands trembled while holding the bread. Daniel sat opposite her, watching silently. After a while, she looked up, her voice timid. "Do humans always share food with strangers?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "No, not always," he admitted. "But sometimes they should." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "My people never trusted humans," she said quietly. "But my parents, they believed kindness could be found anywhere, even in other worlds." Her voice broke. "They were wrong." Daniel's chest grew heavy at her words. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. She nodded slowly, clutching the bread as if it gave her strength. "There was a raid," she began. "They took my father first, then my mother. They said families without work papers were dangerous." Her words spilled out in broken whispers. "They pushed me aside, said I was too small, too weak to matter. They left me crying in the street." Her small body shook, her voice cracking, like thin ice. "Since that day, no one wanted me, not even my own people, because an abandoned child is a burden." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger rising inside him. He wanted to curse the patrols, the laws, the heartless world that would throw away a child. But he swallowed it down, choosing instead to keep his voice calm. "You are not a burden," he said firmly. "You are a child who deserves care just like any other." Lyra blinked at him, as if she had never heard those words before. Her lips quivered. "Do you really mean it?" Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, I mean it." The girl suddenly wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve, sitting straighter. "I knew you would be different," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his tired body aching. He had not chosen this life. He never dreamed of being a father, not even a pretend one. But in this moment, with her fragile hope resting on his words, he felt something awaken inside him, something that had been missing for too long. Responsibility, belonging, maybe even love. Later, as the night deepened, Daniel gave her his blanket. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sit by the door." Her glowing eyes widened. "No, you'll be cold." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I've been cold before. It won't kill me." She climbed into the bed slowly, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her voice came out small, but it carried in the silence. Good night. Daddy? The word struck Daniel's heart like thunder. It was only pretend, only for one day, but it felt more real than anything he had known in years. He sat by the door, listening as her breathing slowed. She clutched the blanket, her body, finally relaxing into sleep. Daniel stared at the dark room, unable to rest. He knew tomorrow would be harder. Patrols were already searching, neighbors already whispering. But tonight, one abandoned alien child had called him Daddy. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt he had a reason to fight for tomorrow. The morning light crept through the cracked window, painting the small room in pale colors. Daniel had not slept, his body stiff from sitting against the door all night. He watched the little girl curled up in his bed, her breathing soft, her silver-marked skin glowing faintly under the thin blanket. For a moment she looked like any child, innocent and safe. But Daniel knew the truth. She was not safe at all. A knock echoed from outside, sudden and sharp. Daniel froze, his heart slamming in his chest. Lyra stirred, half waking, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the heavy voice of a neighbor. Daniel, you awake? Patrols are moving through the street, better be careful. Daniel forced a steady voice. Yeah, I heard, he replied through the door. He waited until footsteps faded, before letting out the breath he held. Lyra's small hands clutched the blanket tightly. They're looking for me, she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel nodded grimly. Yes, and if they find you here, they'll take you away. And I'll be punished too. She lowered her head, shame flooding her eyes. You should not keep me here, Daddy, she whispered, the word carrying both love and guilt. They'll hurt you because of me. Daniel walked to her side, crouching, so his face met hers. You think I'd throw you out after what you told me last night? His tone was firm. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she stayed silent. You're not leaving, he said. Not while I can still stand. He began to pace, running his hand through his messy hair. The risks swirled in his mind. Neighbors could report him. Patrols could storm the room, and even his work could be taken from him if they suspected he was hiding someone. He lived quietly all his life. Unseen, unwanted, but now the smallest girl had made him visible. Still, the thought of letting her go alone into those streets was impossible. The risk no longer mattered. What mattered was her. Daniel gathered what little food he had left, breaking another piece of bread for her. You'll need strength, he said. Today won't be easy. She ate quietly, her glowing eyes never leaving his face. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. Daniel stopped, his jaw tightening. He didn't have a simple answer, but he spoke from the only truth in his chest. Because no child should beg for a father. The words silenced the room. Lyra's lips trembled, her tears falling again. She reached across the table, her tiny hand resting on his. I wish you were my real daddy, she whispered. Daniel felt the weight of those words sink deep, heavier than any burden he had carried before. By midday, voices filled the street below, heavy boots striking against the broken road. Daniel pulled Lyra away from the window. Patrol officers in dark uniforms walked from door to door, shouting orders. They're searching every home, Daniel muttered, his pulse quickening. He glanced around his room, too small to hide anyone properly. His eyes landed on the loose board beneath the shelf, a hollow space he had once used to hide his wages. Quick, Lyra, under here, he said, pulling at the board. She stared, terrified. No, I don't want to leave you. You won't, Daniel whispered fiercely. But you must stay. Quiet! She crawled into the narrow space, curling her body as small as possible. Daniel replaced the board, his hands trembling. Moments later, the knock came again, this time heavier, louder. Open up! Patrol inspection. Daniel forced calm into his voice, unlocking the door slowly. Two officers stepped inside, their eyes cold, scanning every corner. You live alone? One of them asked. Yes, Daniel replied evenly. Always have. The officer stepped closer, his gaze sharp. Neighbors said they saw movement in your window last night. Daniel's heart thudded painfully, but he kept his face steady. Probably my lamp, it flickers, he said. The officer stared at him for a long moment, then kicked at the shelf. The wood rattled, but did not give way. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Finally, the officers turned. "Keep your door unlocked next time." "Janitor," one of them growled. "We don't like wasting time on nobodies." They left, slamming the door behind them. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest burning with the breath he had held too long. He rushed to the shelf, lifting the board. Lyra's glowing eyes peeked out, wet with tears. She scrambled into his arms, sobbing into his chest. "I thought they would take me," she cried, her voice breaking. Daniel held her tightly, his voice steady but heavy. "As long as I breathe, no one will." He knew now the risk was real, closer than ever. One wrong move, one careless word, and both their lives could end in ruin. But when he looked into Lyra's eyes filled with fear and trust, he felt his decision harden like iron. He had chosen her, chosen this path no matter the danger. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to protect someone. And for the first time, the risk was worth everything. The sun rose higher, and the streets outside grew louder. Merchants shouted, neighbors gossiped, and patrol boots echoed on the stone road. Daniel stood by the small window, his eyes scanning the alley, his mind heavy with worry. Lyra sat quietly on the bed, hugging his blanket, her glowing silver lines dimmed by fear. Neither of them spoke for a while, the silence between them filled with unspoken dread. At last, Lyra broke the silence, her voice trembling. "They won't stop, will they?" Daniel shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, they won't. The patrols are like hounds. Once they have a scent, they keep chasing until they catch something." Lyra lowered her head. "Then I should leave. If they find me here, they'll take you too." Her words stabbed Daniel deeper than he expected. He turned sharply, his voice firm. "No, you are not leaving." She flinched at the sudden tone, her eyes wide. But Daniel softened quickly, crouching to her level. "I didn't mean to scare you, Lyra, but listen to me. You're not alone anymore, not while I'm here." Her eyes filled with tears again. "But the world is against us, isn't it?" she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard, looking out the window at the officers marching in pairs. "Yes, it feels like that," he admitted. "But sometimes, even when the whole world is against you, one person can stand in the way." Later that morning, Daniel left briefly to fetch water from the pump down the street. He kept his steps calm, though his heart raced, afraid of leaving her even for a few minutes. As he returned, he caught two neighbors whispering near his door. "Strange, isn't it?" Daniel never had visitors before, one muttered. "Maybe he's hiding something," the other replied. "I saw a shadow move behind his curtain last night." Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing himself to walk past them without reaction. Every word carried danger, every suspicion a blade against his back. Inside, Lyra rushed to him, eyes wide with worry. "Did they follow you?" she asked. "No," Daniel said, setting the water down, though he could still hear the neighbors' voices echoing in his mind. He looked at her small form, trembling but still holding on. "They are not the enemy I fear the most," he muttered. "It's fear itself that makes people cruel." As the day stretched into evening, the patrols grew bolder, knocking on more doors, searching for abandoned alien children. Daniel kept Lyra hidden whenever boots echoed close, his body tense with every sound. At one point, an officer shouted in the street, "Any house hiding alien strays will be punished. Humans who protect them are traitors." The words cut through Daniel like fire. He looked at Lyra, her face pale, her small hands clinging to his sleeve. "Just one more day, Daddy, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel's heart ached because he knew she was asking for something he wanted too, but more than just a day. That night, Daniel took her hand and guided her outside into the alley. The sky above was filled with stars, though city smoke dimmed their shine. He crouched down so she could look into his tired eyes. "Listen, Lyra," he said softly. "This world may never accept you. It may never accept us. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what we choose." She frowned, confused. "What do you choose?" she asked. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I choose to stand with you. even if it means standing against everyone else. Her lips quivered, tears sliding down her cheeks. No one ever chose me before, she whispered. Daniel brushed her, hair back gently, then let me be the first. Suddenly heavy footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. Patrol officers carrying lanterns scanned the dark corners, their shadows stretching long. Daniel pulled Lyra close, pressing her against the wall, his heart racing. The officers paused only a few steps away, their light brushing across the broken crates where she had first hidden. Empty, one officer muttered before moving on. Daniel held his breath until they disappeared into the next street. Lyra clutched his hand tightly, her voice barely a whisper. They almost saw us. Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. Yes, but they didn't, and as long as I live, I won't let them. When they returned to the room, Lyra sat quietly on the bed, watching him with wide eyes. Daddy, she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and trust. Yes? Daniel answered, sitting down across from her. If the world is against us, will you still pretend tomorrow too? Daniel stared at her, the word pretend echoing painfully in his chest. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her it was no longer pretend, but his throat closed with the weight of it. Instead, he said firmly, yes, tomorrow too. And in that, promise. Daniel felt the world's weight press harder against his shoulders. The patrols, the neighbors, the laws, every piece of it was set against them, but none of it mattered compared to the fragile child who called him Daddy. For her, he was willing to risk everything, even if it meant the whole world would turn its eyes on him. The night was long, but the morning came too quickly. Daniel's eyes burned from lack of sleep, yet his mind was sharp. He knew the patrols would return, he knew the neighbors were whispering, and he knew danger was no longer far away. It was at his door. Lyra sat quietly at the table, her silver-marked skin faintly glowing in the dim light. She chewed on a piece of stale bread, but her eyes never left Daniel's face. She could see the lines of worry there, the tight jaw, the heavy silence. A sudden pounding rattled the door. Open up, patrol inspection, a rough voice barked. Lyra dropped the bread, her hands shaking. Daniel's heart slammed in his chest, but his face stayed calm. Quick, under the floor, he whispered, pulling at the loose board. Lyra crawled into the narrow space, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. He pressed the board back into place, forcing his hands not to tremble. The pounding grew louder. Last warning, open up. Daniel took a deep breath, then unlocked the door. 2 officers stepped inside, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Their cold eyes scanned the room, the bed, the shelf, the corners. You, again, one officer muttered. We warned you yesterday, didn't we? Daniel forced a shrug. You did, but there's nothing here. The taller officer narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. You smell like fear, janitor. What are you? Hiding? Daniel stood firm, though his hands itched with tension. Only dust and tired bones, he said flatly. The officer sneered, pushing past him, opening cupboards, lifting blankets. The room was too small to hide much, and Daniel knew it. Every second felt like a blade against his throat. The shorter officer kicked at the shelf, his boot thudding against the wood above Lyra's head. Daniel clenched his fists, ready to distract them if they tore it open, but after a long, tense silence, the taller one spat on the floor. Nothing here, he growled. Waste of time, they stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Daniel waited until their steps faded before rushing to the shelf. He lifted the board, and Lyra scrambled out, gasping for air. Her body shook as she threw her arms around his waist. I thought they would take me, she cried into his shirt. Daniel held her close, his voice rough but steady. As long as I'm here, no one will. She pulled back, her eyes wet, her voice breaking. Maybe I should leave, Daddy. Maybe I should run far away so they don't hurt you. Daniel knelt before her, gripping her shoulders, his voice sharp with emotion. Don't ever say that again. She flinched, but he softened, brushing a tear from her cheek. You are not the problem, Lyra. The problem is this world that treats you like nothing. But you are not nothing, do you understand? She nodded weakly, though more tears slipped down her cheeks. Her voice came out small. But if you keep me, they'll destroy your life. Daniel let out a long breath. his eyes locked on hers. My life wasn't much before you. Just silence, work and empty rooms, he admitted. But now you gave me something worth living for, worth fighting for. Lyra's lips trembled. You mean me? Daniel's answer was simple, steady. Yes, you. That night they sat together in the small room, the candlelight flickering on their faces. Outside, voices still whispered, boots still marched, danger still waited. But inside, there was warmth, fragile but real. Lyra curled against him, her head on his arm, her voice soft. If I'm your daughter for a day, would you still want me tomorrow? Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to say yes, to shout it, to claim her forever. Instead, he said carefully, if I am your daddy for a day, then I will be your daddy for as long as I breathe. Her tears returned, but this time, they were different. They fell with relief, with hope, with something she had never been given before. She whispered into his chest, then you've already passed the test. Daniel frowned slightly. What test? Her voice was small but clear. The test of love, Daddy. Only love risks everything. The word struck Daniel's heart, heavier than any truth he had known. He tightened his arms around her, his resolve hardening like steel. This was no longer about pretending, no longer about one day. This was about standing against a world that wanted to break her, and he would not let it. The candle burned low, the shadows deepened, and the night pressed close. But in that tiny room, Daniel and Lyra were no longer just a man and an abandoned child. They were a family, fragile and new, but strong enough to face the storm. And when the storm came, and Daniel knew it would, he was ready, because he had already chosen his answer. He had chosen her. The city never rested, even at night. Patrol, torches lit the streets, shadows moved on every wall, and whispers of fear carried through the air. Daniel sat by the window of his small room, watching the lanterns of the patrol sweep past again and again. His heart was heavy, because he knew what was coming. They would not stop until they found every abandoned alien child, and if they discovered Lyra with him, both their lives would be crushed behind him. Lyra lay curled on the bed, her glowing silver lines dim in the faint light. She looked peaceful for a moment, her breath soft, her small hands clutching the blanket. Daniel turned away from the window and stared at her. His chest tight. She was just a child, fragile, abandoned, lost. Yet she trusted him with everything she had. He could feel her trust pressing on him like a weight heavier than stone. And he asked himself the question he had been avoiding since the night they met. What was he willing to lose for her? His safety, his home, his job, maybe even his life. Would he risk everything for a child who wasn't even his? The answer burned inside him, fierce and undeniable. Yes, he would. The next morning, a neighbor stopped him at the well. You know the patrols are circling close, the man whispered, his eyes sharp. If they find anything in your room, you'll pay with more than wages. Daniel forced a faint smile. I have nothing to hide, he lied. But inside, his blood ran cold. He could see suspicion in the man's gaze, and he knew whispers were spreading faster than fire. Back in the room, Lyra noticed his silence. Daddy, she said softly. You're afraid. Daniel sat down across from her, his hands clasped. Yes, I am, he admitted, his voice low. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Then let me go. Please, if I'm gone, they won't hurt you. Daniel leaned forward quickly, his tone sharp. Stop saying that, Lyra. She flinched, but he reached out, holding her hand gently. You are not leaving. Do you understand? Not now. Not ever. She blinked up at him, her lips trembling. Then what will you do? Daniel's voice was steady now, the decision already carved deep inside him. I will fight. If they come, I will fight. And if I cannot fight, then I will stand and refuse to give you up. Her tears fell silently. No one has ever chosen me like that, she whispered. Daniel brushed her hair back, his voice softer. Then it's time someone did. That night, the sound of boots came again, louder, closer. This time, the patrol didn't just knock, they pounded on doors, dragging out families, checking every corner. Daniel held Lyra close. her small body shaking against his chest. "They're coming," she whispered, her breath shallow. Daniel lifted her chin, looking into her glowing eyes. "Listen to me, Lyra. You asked me to pretend, just for one day." She nodded quickly, her tears spilling. "But I can't pretend anymore," Daniel said firmly. "I don't want just one day, I want forever, do you understand?" Her eyes widened as if his words were too heavy to believe. "You mean, I'm really your daughter now?" she whispered. Daniel smiled faintly, though his voice shook. "Yes, mine, from now until the end, no matter what they say, no matter what they do." The pounding came to his door. "Open up. Patrol inspection." Daniel stood tall, his chest rising with determination. He looked at Lyra one last time, her face pale with fear, her eyes filled with trust. "Stay behind me," he told her, his voice steady as stone. She clutched his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, don't let them take me." Daniel placed his hand over hers. "They will only take you if they take me first." The door rattled under the force of the patrol's fists. Daniel walked toward it, each step heavy, each breath slow. This was the choice, the moment where silence would no longer protect him. He had lived his whole life unseen, but tonight, the world would see him. Not as a janitor, not as a nobody, but as a father. He reached for the lock, his hand steady. In his heart, there was no longer fear, only resolve. He would face whatever, waited on the other side because he had already made his choice, and his choice was her. The pounding on the door grew louder, each strike shaking the thin walls of Daniel's room. "Open up. Patrol inspection." The voices roared, sharp and merciless. Daniel stood before the door, his body tense, his heart steady. Behind him, Lyra clung to his sleeve, her glowing eyes wide with terror. But she said nothing because she trusted him, and that trust gave him strength. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. Two patrol officers pushed their way inside, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. Their lanterns lit up the small room, sweeping over the bed, the shelf, the table. "You again," one officer sneered, his gaze full of suspicion. "We warned you, and now we're sure. You're hiding one of them." Daniel's face remained calm, though his chest burned. "You see me standing here, and yet you accuse me of lies," he said, his voice firm. The taller officer stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then let us search if you have nothing to hide." Daniel moved slightly, blocking their path. "No," he said quietly, but the word carried the weight of stone. The officers froze for a moment, surprised by the defiance of a man they thought was nobody. "Move aside, janitor," the taller one barked. Daniel's eyes flashed. "I am not moving, not this time." The officers exchanged sharp glances, their hands gripping their batons. Behind Daniel, Lyra's trembling voice broke the silence. "Daddy," she whispered, "don't let them take me." The word struck through the room like lightning. Both officers stared, their faces twisting in disbelief. "You dare claim her?" One spat. "She is not human, she is property of the state." Daniel's voice rose, strong and clear. "No, she is my daughter, and no law, no patrol, no fear will change that." His words carried out into the street where neighbors had gathered to watch. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some shocked, some fearful, some moved. The officers snarled, stepping closer. "You think you can defy the law? You'll be punished, both of you." Daniel spread his arms slightly, shielding Lyra with his body. "Then punish me, but you will not touch her." The taller officer raised his baton, ready to strike. But before he could swing, a voice rang, out from the crowd. "Enough." The people turned. An old woman stepped forward, her face lined with age, her voice strong. "That girl has harmed no one, yet you hunt her like an animal." Another voice rose, a man shouting, "He calls her his daughter, and he's right, no patrol can erase that." One by one, more voices joined. The neighbors who once whispered now stood taller, some stepping closer to Daniel's door. The patrol officers hesitated, their confidence shaken by the rising defiance. Daniel felt Lyra clutch tighter at his sleeve, her tears streaming silently. For the first time since her parents were taken, she was not alone. The crowd's voices gave weight to Daniel's stand. "You see?" Daniel said, his voice steady. You can call me a janitor, a nobody, but tonight I am a father and this child is mine. The officers cursed, glaring at the crowd, but the moment was slipping from their hands. Too many eyes were watching, too many voices rising. One officer spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he hissed. Before turning sharply, the other followed, their boots pounding away into the night. The patrol had been driven back, not by weapons, but by the courage of one man and the voices of many. Daniel closed the door slowly, his breath heavy, his body trembling from the storm he had faced. He turned, and there was Lyra, her glowing eyes filled with awe. "You didn't pretend," she whispered, her voice breaking into sobs. "You really became my daddy." Daniel knelt down, pulling her into his arms, his voice rough but full of warmth. "Yes, Lyra, I did, and I will be, for every day I still breathe." She buried her face in his chest, crying with relief. Her small body shook, but now it shook with hope, not fear. For the first time, the word daddy was not a desperate plea. It was truth, a truth stronger than the laws, stronger than the patrols, stronger than the world against them. Outside, the stars shone faintly through the city's smoke. The streets were still dangerous, and tomorrow might bring more battles. But in that tiny room, something unbreakable had been born. Not from blood, not from law, but from choice, from courage, from love, a family born in defiance.